Over the past month or so, I've been working on customizing the Reaper 6 theme. It's far from finished, but it's in a pretty good place now. I'm really happy with it, and I want to share some of the things that I've learned so that you can customize your theme as well. Before we get into the main content of this video, I want to say a few things. I want to be the first to admit that my custom theme is not drastically different from default 6. There's a lot of little things, but overall, it's probably going to look the same to most people, and that's totally okay. I think it's more than fair to say that this entire thing is a waste of time, and you have to be okay with going through this process and then just enjoying the process of it. If you just want to focus on music making and not worry about the theme, that is totally acceptable, totally fair, and in a lot of times I agree with you. But this is something that I wanted to learn on my own for a very long time, and this just seemed like the best time to do it. I'm not going to share my theme at this time. It's far from finished. There's a lot more things that I want to do with it. And I finally understand why there's so many themes announced on the Reaper forum that are close to finished, but just never get released. I can really understand that feeling now. This project was a big reminder of how important it is to write things down as you're learning. So I spent like a month on doing all these little tweaks and researching things. And then when I started writing down sort of a script for this video, I ended up going in much deeper, implementing a lot more changes, understanding things a lot better. And it was really just the process of writing things down in order to teach someone where I learned the most. I learned more in the 3 days I spent writing the script than I did in the whole month spent working on the project originally. I now have even more respect for the actual theme makers in the community. They put in countless hours. They have to go through this learning process. They have to actually do a good job in every step of the image editing process and all the code that goes into a Reaper theme. And it's incredible that they actually put in that effort and share the results with the community, usually for free. And that's amazing. Now, with all that said, let's get into the video. Hope you enjoy it. So we're looking at the default 6 theme right now. It's got a very dark background. The transport bar has kind of a mix of different visual styles. There's this sort of chrome look. When playback is running, it has a very flat style. The toolbar buttons don't have any borders. So I'm going to switch over to my custom theme. And you can see that the background is a lot brighter. The item colors make it a lot easier for editing. I've got my transport bar colors, or all the font colors, I think stand out a lot more, and they give me the information a little bit easier than kind of the more muted gray color there. The transport bar I've consolidated into just the buttons that I actually use. Most of the time I'm using keyboard shortcuts, and I don't really need these buttons for anything other than visual reference. I think I have some pretty nice looking toolbar buttons now. They have a border now. When you hover over it, they brighten. Clicked, it has a kind of a glow effect. If it's an armed action, it has this highlight. I think it looks really nice. Without that border, I think these icons looked kind of weird. I'll just show you with the default. I think that these don't really look like buttons until you hover over them. Inside of Reaper, there are 2 ways that we can adjust the theme. First is with the default 6 theme adjuster, which is new with Reaper 6, and the theme development tweak window. Both of these can be found inside of the action list. So looking at the theme adjuster in my custom theme, I've shown this in other Reaper 6 videos. You can just copy these settings if you like. So I've got track control panel, mixer panels, custom colors, envelopes, transport. These are the settings that I'm using. Anytime you make a change in there, it gets written into a INI file inside of the Reaper folder. So that's reaperdaw. All these parameters get saved in here. We're going to use this to actually copy all of the settings from my custom theme into one that we're going to start building today, which I've actually already gone ahead and done by copying and pasting and giving this a name. This is the name that we're going to use for a customized Reaper. So the other way to modify Reaper's theme is through this theme tweak configuration window. So in here, you can change a lot of the colors, things like the main window transport text that's going to do your time selection and your BPM indicators. You got your toolbar button text, track background for odd tracks and even tracks, the track divider lines. So that's this gray and sort of blue gray that you see here. You can adjust this pretty easily. So I recommend getting the Reaper 6 default as close as possible to your ideal, just using those two things at first. Now we're going to make a copy of that and then make a custom theme. We're going back to the Reaper resources folder, and we look for color themes. In here, we're going to take our default 6.0 Reaper theme zip, and we're going to duplicate it. Next, we're going to modify this with changing the extension. So instead of .reaper theme zip, we're going to change this to reaper theme.zip and confirm. Then open up this zip file. We can go back to that original file there, that duplicate file, and we'll just delete that because we don't need that. So we've got default 6 copy Reaper theme. Inside here, we've got default 6 unpacked and default 6 unpacked .reaper theme. This is where all those settings that were for the background colors and things like that are saved. But because these got put into a subdirectory here, I'm just going to move these, delete that empty directory, and then rename this. So instead of unpacked, it will be custom space default 6. And yeah, instead of default 6 unpacked, we will call this custom. All right, so here's my theme file, and here's my theme images folder. All right, so let's just drag this into Reaper to change the theme. So now it looks really broken. We need to relink all the image files. So we're gonna open up that theme development tweak window, and we're going down here. So it's looking in this folder, default 6 unpacked, and we will just rename this to the correct folder, which was custom space default 6, default _6. Hit reload. Image files are there now, and we hit save up here. And so it should automatically go to the right folder. Just hit save and replace. And here's default, custom default. Should look exactly the same now, but we're free to make any customization we want. All right, back to the theme images folder. So we're in the folder custom default _6. In this folder, there are 2 subdirectories for high resolution and kind of medium resolution files, the 150 and 200. You can probably guess which one is which. And then there's the main image folder, which has all of the normal standard resolution files. Some of the images exist in all 3 folders. Some of them are only in kind of the main standard folder. And if something doesn't exist in that high-res folder, it's just going to check in the standard one. So these images in here override the ones in the standard. Default 6 is a high DPI aware theme, so it uses different images depending on the resolution of the screen. I'm using a MacBook Pro with a Retina display, which is kind of like having a 4K double DPI monitor. And my other monitor is a standard resolution Dell monitor, very old. So when I move things around between the different windows, it's actually picking files from either of these image folders. So it's using the 200 folder when something is displayed on my main monitor, but it's switching over to the standard resolution folder when it's on my second monitor. So if I'm editing any of the images in here, I need to remember to modify them in probably all 3 folders just to be safe. If you're not sure which image folder you're actually using, just go ahead and rename the 200 folder to like Z200 and reload your theme. This theme development window is really helpful for that. If I hit reload, you can see that a lot of the stuff broke because that 200 folder isn't available anymore. So back here, rename that properly, hit reload, and there we go. We're going to be reloading the theme a lot. So having this window open or the SWS extension resources window is a good one to compare your different themes once you load in the theme file. So I'll hit load theme, add in my custom default 6. And so I can go between my default 6, my custom theme, my own custom theme, and the one we're working on here pretty simply just by double clicking. And there's also one other script that I'll show you, Locasana's refresh current theme. This is another one that I use quite a lot. I use the knobs on item volumes quite a lot, and I really don't like how they look in the default 6 theme. I think when they're enabled, they have this sort of chrome metal look, and when they're disabled, they fit in pretty well with the rest of the track. So in my version of the theme, I've given the center of the knob basically the same sort of hue as the other media item icons. And so I'll show you what that looks like in the image editor. I use Pixelmator Pro. So here's the original. Most of the images in a Reaper theme will use a 3-slice image format. There's normal, there is mouse over, and there is a pressed version of the image. Basically, I took this middle part and copied that to the left and right, just erasing the left and right. And then I added in a fill in the center of the same sort of hue as the media item icons. The finished icon looks like this. So it's a little bit brighter when you're holding down the mouse on it. I mean, it's a really simple change, but I find it works a lot better with the rest of the theme. We're going to come into editing the transport images, but I just want to show you that these also have the 3-slice format, but transport buttons have multiple states. So just the record button, for example, there's the off state with the default, the mouse over, and the pressed versions. Then you've got when recording is actually happening, the 3 different states. When loop enable is on, you also have a different icon on the record button. Again, 3 states and 2 versions of that. And then there's also the punch in recording modes. So yeah, so it's not always just a simple fix to change one little icon. So let's look at the custom toolbar buttons. By default, there's no border, there's no overlays, no sort of like lighting effects. If we switch over to like the default 5 theme, you see that all of the icons have a border and they have this sort of highlight and shadow effect. And that's because of 2 different image files that are used in the theme. The first one they use is toolbar blank PNG. Toolbar blank is used for any of the custom toolbar buttons, pretty much anything other than the main icons. So anything with a text icon or a custom icon on it, it's going to use that. So if you want a border, you need to add that into that file. And then composite toolbar overlay.png. It's not used in the Reaper 6 theme, but in the previous one, that's that highlight and shadow effect. You can use both. I'm only using the toolbar blank.png with a custom edit. So Reaperblog 6 theme looks like this. So I've got a light border with a darker border around that. So this looks more like a panel of metal with the buttons are actually cut out rather than, just sitting, just text on top of a flat panel. So I show you what that looks like in Pixelmator. I went through many, many, many different iterations of this. Here's the original toolbar blank that's used in the default 6 theme. There's a very, very slight overlay on the buttons. So there's a slight highlight when you mouse over. An active button will have this particular green color overlaid on top. But there's no border. It just has a transparent border. So this is where I ended up with mine. where I've got this kind of middle gray color for around the icon. Then I have this semi-transparent border around all of the buttons. And then when a button is actually active, it has this sort of highlight, this glow. I'm imagining like there's in the middle of this button, there is an LED that lights up, and then it's diffused across the face of the button, and the edges light up as well. So that's kind of my thought process for this. The actual size of these images is super tiny, like they're only this big. So the actual lines here are only 1 pixel across, but yeah, it does the trick. And the composite toolbar overlay looks like this. This is taken out of the default 5 folder. It's kind of just a very simple gradient. The other thing that affects toolbar buttons is these armed fill mode. And so if you search for toolbar in the theme development window, you'll find toolbar button armed fill mode. So I like to use an add mode with 0.4 here. It's also using this color that I selected. So, I mean, you can change this to any color. So it gets more of a blue, or it could be a pink. But it's going to be the original color plus the the color of the toolbar blank third slice. They're going to be combined using this blend mode. All right, so let's look at track meters. The default uses just this, basically a solid green. And if a track clips, then it turns orange. My version of the Reaper theme uses a gradient, so a green up to red color. And when it clips, it doesn't change color. There's actually a lot of different image files for this. Like most things in the Reaper theme, it's pretty simple to make an edit to the image files if you know which ones to look in. There's actually like 13 different image files that you would need to edit, but there is another option. You can remove or rename all of those images and then change the colors directly in the theme tweaker. So let me do that. I'm going to go over to my Reaper custom theme. I'll just show you what this looks like. Custom default. I'm going to search for meter. And you see all of these ones here: meter, BG, PNG, MCP, TCP, BGV, RMS, all of these ones. We're just going to rename this with a ZZ at the beginning so it hides. And these other ones, meter, strip, H, V, RMS, and V. So I'm just going to rename these and add ZZ to the beginning of the name. So when we go back into the theme, reload the images, it's going to look completely different. Those images are now missing. We can go into the theme tweaker, and now these colors are active. So view, meter, top, middle, bottom, interlace color, and the VU MIDI activity. So I'll just play this. So you can see it's a gradient between these three colors here. We can make the top yellow. We can make the middle more of a neon green. We can make the bottom more of almost a black, maybe. Let's try that. So let's re-enable these, but actually just change the colors. So I'm going to rename 14 files, replace ZZ with nothing. So that re-enables those images in the theme. So it looks like this. So if you just want to change the meter colors easily, the main ones to modify here are the strip ones. If we just look for strip, meter strip H, meter strip V RMS, and meter strip V PNG. So here's the ones that I'm using. I've got meter strip V. This one I actually downloaded from a user called Blank Files. I just really like this gradient that he's selected. Because I only had the vertical version of this, I needed to edit it just basically turning it 90 degrees and then saving it as meter strip H. He didn't upload a RMS version, which is used on the master track. And so this, what we're seeing here is actually um, kind of blending the default one with his gradient. So kind of a really quick and dirty kind of edit on this. It makes a difference. It looks a lot better, in my opinion. The clip indicators, I modified those. So here's the original color for the Reaper 6 theme is this. And so I just changed it to a more saturated red. So I did meter clip V and meter clip H. So those are actually used in this section of the theme. Meter underscore clip underscore H is used instead of the VU meter clip indicator in the theme tweaker. If you want more information about the meters, the Walter Themers Guide by White Tie, who created the Reaper theme that did all the themes, as far as I know, for Reaper. This is really good documentation on a lot of the stuff in here, and it explains what each column of color does in these files, A through H here. And basically for every channel Reaper needs to display, it just duplicates. So if the track has 6 channels, it's just going to duplicate this column of color and display that as needed.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
Now we're going to look at rtconfig. Rtconfig contains the code that connects the theme images and colors and functions to make it work. This isn't something you can learn in an afternoon. It's really complicated. And this is something that I still feel very much hopeless about learning. But luckily, I'm not trying to make big changes here. And most of the documentation that you can find online for versions 4 and 5 still applies for the most part. So you want to open up rtconfig in an actual like plain text or code editor. At the top of this window, there are global settings here. And most of them you won't want to touch, but there are some interesting ones here. The TCP heights, 4, 25, 50, 64, super collapsed, small, and record arm size. So I've got a folder here, and if I collapse the folder, this is as small as it goes, which is 4 pixels on those child tracks. I could make this 1 pixel and then reload. And now those super collapsed child tracks are only taking up 1 pixel each. So that might be something you want to adjust. Let's change the order and appearance of the transport buttons. I never use the forward and back buttons, so I'll just hide them in rtconfig. So I'm going to look for the section draw content in section buttons. So that's this section here. So set trans.rew and set trans.fwd. I can comment these out by adding a semicolon. Anything I put a semicolon in front of is going to turn that code into a comment, which just means that it's not going to be used. It's a really quick way of taking something out of the code without actually deleting it entirely. So I'm just going to hit save here, and I'll show you what this looks like in Reaper now. It's completely moved the position of that bar, and it's overlapping the time selection area. So that's not quite right. And why did that happen? Because a lot of the stuff in rtconfig uses relative positions of other buttons. So, you define the size of the buttons and everything in one section, and then when you actually go to draw it, you're just using the size to determine the position of the next button. So if we're hiding set trans.rew, and this is set for determining its location from here, and the next button, which is the record button, is looking for the position of the fast forward button, that's why we're getting this issue here. We're going to keep the size of the buttons the same, but we will take the sec buttons, section buttons thing here, copy that, and go over to the record button. That's this one. And we're just going to change its location to this one. Okay. So instead of being positioned after the fast forward button, it's going to be positioned as the first in the buttons section. And while we're at it, let's also hide the stop and pause button, since I never use those either. So I'm going to hit save anyway, and reload. So let's put that back at the center. Let's zoom in here. And you can see that it looks a little bit different once you start taking things away. There's this really dark border around these buttons, and it doesn't look right anymore. That's why my theme has no drop shadow on these buttons. So, or no kind of dark outline. I kind of did a bad job editing that. You can kind of see a flicker here when you mouse over, but that's the main reason why I did that. Putting that back to the custom default, it looks like this now. So there we go. We've changed, we've hidden some of those buttons, and we've made sure that they are anchored in the correct place. So I hope that makes sense. There's a section here in the transports section for setting the size of each of the buttons and kind of their positions. But there's also the relative position, like this item and then this item and then this item, like they're referencing the previous buttons. And if you change the order, sometimes you also need to change the anchors so that it looks right. So if we wanted the play button to be before the record button, we could just cut that, paste that. So it's like that. So it goes play button, record button, repeat button. But we're not going to change any of the anchors. It's probably going to look funny. Yeah, so we got the record button in the correct spot, but the play and the repeat button have lost their anchors, so they just default to the far left. Okay, so going back to my Reaper theme, I should also mention that if you are modifying the theme image files, you need to make sure that it works for all resolutions. And I haven't done that with my transport buttons. So if I move this up to the top to my second monitor and I screenshot this so you can see, in this case, it's reverted back to the other layout, which doesn't have all the changes that I made. And it's using the wrong image files. It's using the wrong layout because I didn't save that into my screen set to show that correct layout for the DPI. But the other thing is that I didn't modify the images in the default folder. If I go to my R6 Reaperblog, and I've got my transport buttons, I only modified the 200 transport repeat in Pixelmator. Looks like this, which all I've done is removed this black border around. So I need to export this in another size that works with the other layouts. So image size, I'll change this to % and set this to 50% and OK, and export. And that goes into this other theme folder. And yes, replace. Now, if I go back into Reaper, reload the images, bring this up to here, and then screenshot this for you guys to see. I've got the correct image loaded in here now, which looks a little weird when it's blown up like this, resized from the screenshot. But it looks fine on my screen as I'm actually using it. If you start off with the 200 resolution files, just export them as the 75 and 50% files, and then it'll work no matter which layout you're using. We are still not finished. I wish we were. Let's look at the order of the track control panel buttons. we've got record enable, monitor, the track label, the volume, routing, effects, trim, and my pan controls. Let's look in rtconfig. All right, so we're going to go over to the track control panel section. Most of this stuff we don't need to touch until we get down to this section where we've got these then elements here. So similar to how the transport buttons follow a certain order, basically whatever order they're put into the code, this is very similar, but it's done in a different way. You just put then, and you put the name of the module, I guess you would call it, the image, and then the size and padding in there. So in this case, it's a little bit easier to set because we can just take the then pan group, TCP pan size, and we'll cut that. And let's try this after the volume control, like that. And now I'm just going to make this change on all of the layouts, just so it's always there. So I'm going to cut this, put it after the volume, and go to my 200% layout and pan group and put that after the volume. So that should be all versions of the default layout A. So there we go. We've got the pan controls right after the track volume. And I think that's a little bit better. I think things fit a little bit better. I don't mind if the trim control gets hidden because it's one I use the least, but I use panning a lot. I use panning just as much as the mute and solo. To make the record button and the track label and the volume control all kind of seamlessly go together, some of these buttons actually have a hard edge that are meant to be put together. So for example, we could put the TCP IO right after the record monitor button, like that, between the record monitor button and the track label. It looks like this. And so we've got this hard edge on the record enable button, and this just doesn't match up very well. It's pretty easy to rearrange them, but the images don't always allow you to make that actually look good. So back to my customized theme, that's pretty much the same. That's how I have mine. I've got the panning right after. You can also go in here and mess around with sizes. This changes the image size. And the padding is the next column, but that will actually pad it on both the left and the right. In the mixer section of rtconfig, I expected this to be a lot more organized and laid out very similar to the TCP or the transport area. This is probably the most confusing part. I think it's just because of the way that these buttons have to interact with the theme adjuster script and things like that. This, then this, then this function doesn't really work. I can't read this at all. I can kind of understand this part of it, which is controlling when things are hidden as you resize the mixer. I don't easily see like where you can rearrange the order, and I don't think you can easily with this. The main thing I would love to do with this is put track IO button right between the effects button and the panning. That would be ideal for me because I keep losing it down here. I never think to look in that spot, and even after quite a while of using this Reaper theme, I still get lost. I liked where that was in the Reaper 5 theme. You know, having this routing button up here was very convenient, and I was using that a lot for, for routing or for drag and drop and things like that. But when it's down at the lower section of the track controls, it's a lot harder to use. Just my opinion. That's what I found from using this for a while. All right, so that's where I've ended up with my learning of the Reaper theming, and it's been kind of a long journey, and I'm not done yet, but that's where I gotta end this video because I've been recording pretty much all day on this, and I'm sure it'll be nice and short and condensed for you guys, but it's been in a few hours that I started recording. So hope you've enjoyed it. Hope you've learned something. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Join our Facebook group, Reaperblog Community. Support the Reaperblog through Patreon, and visit reaperblog.net for a lot more tutorials.